right, everybody, welcome back to the Goat Rodeo podcast. Garrett Smith here, your host from Reveal Technology, joined by regular co-hosts Simon Kuhn and Dave Cottle, and also joined this week by guest fourth wheel co-host Chris Naganuma, recent join to the company, and we'll get into a bit more about his background and why he's relevant to the conversation today. But I just wanted to start off with this. Look what I received in the mail, finally, after winning it. I received the wrestling champion belt from Front Door Defense. This is our friend Noah Scheinbaum, who ran the Defense Game Day event a few weeks ago at the what was that event called, Simon, that I did?
Apex Defense was the
Apex Defense.
Yeah.
Apex Defense. And I won. Apparently, I gave the best answers, and by crowd decision, I won this belt. So I don't know quite what to do with it. I think I technically might have to return it, but I think I might mount it in the background for a little bit. But anyway, thanks, Noah.
Noah wants that back. He can come take it by force.
That's right.
Send his goons after us.
Come and get it. Come and get it.
It's got to go in the. It's got to go in the background. It's got a goat on it.
I know it has to.
I feel like it can either go in the background or it can go in the office, which is another great place for it.
Right. And tell Noah that if he wants, he really can come and get it. I would love to host him at the office. He can come out here to Bozeman.
Come out to Bozeman, say what's up.
I would be remiss, Simon, if I didn't call out the fact that Casey Musgraves is a divisive topic in my house.
How come?
There's a lot of love. There's
Who's
a lot
wrong?
of hate. Who's wrong?
Yeah, who's the wrong?
What is wrong? Define wrong.
If you dislike Casey Musgraves, you're wrong.
Yeah, that's not me. I actually dig her.
Nice.
There's
Good
certain
job.
people in the house who who really don't like Casey Musgraves, so I'll let you handle that.
It's the dog. Your small little dog.
It's not the dog. It's not
Casey
the dog.
Musgraves hater.
It's someone with whom you could have a lengthy disagreement.
Casey Musgraves is great. Star-crossed, phenomenal record.
I don't think she's listening, but you
okay.
should throw down with her.
Big fan.
Yeah.
I have 2 Casey Musgraves shirts. Big fan.
Lucky you, man. Lucky
Right?
you. Is she actually from Texas, or is she just a poser?
Yeah, she's from Texas. I assume. I don't know. I'm not checking.
Yeah, who knows?
We'll get Ian to look it up. Let's get our producer on this.
Yeah,
the
producer.
fact check.
Where's
Casey
Casey
Musgraves'
Musgraves
background.
from?
Yeah.
Dave, we were making fun of Simon's hair the other day, or lack of hair, in the skinhead punk presentation or whatever, and then you went and got a haircut and a shave.
I didn't shave it all off though. That's a different. I'm not going to a concert with this weekend.
Somehow he's cut enough hair for it to be okay in the Army, which doesn't make any sense to me as a Marine, because that's an intolerable haircut for my service. I don't get it. I don't understand. It's only halfway there.
You're right. We would much rather our soldiers look like that.
Yeah, you're gonna get yelled at for looking all fancy. Come on, Dave. You gotta cut it shorter.
So there is a bit of like a war battleground chic, right? That we've seen with all the OSINT feeds from places like Ukraine. I gotta say, Chris, you are repping that chic, that aesthetic really well. The beard. I mean, that's like standard issue Ukraine, right?
Yeah, I'd say so. Probably. Yeah. It's pretty loose over there.
Yeah.
First report always look good.
Well, let's get an intro from you, if you don't mind. So first off, Dave, you got to feel less lonely. You usually have to tool around with 2 Marine knuckleheads. Now the force is in balance because you've got an Army fellow on here. But Chris, can you run maybe a little bit of an intro and then maybe top it off with your recent set of experiences? I think you're very fresh back from Ukraine and a round of embeds. So you want to do a quick intro for us?
Sure. Yeah, I've been. My name's Chris Naganuma. I've been in the defense industry for about 13 years. I came from the Army Striker Brigades. That's where I stayed in and retired out of medically. I ended up deploying to Mosul in 2004, so very early GWAT. And when I had left the service, I started professionally shooting on a 3-gun circuit, which is what I did predominantly, and then built my own business and started working inside of the defense industry, really just kind of understanding both sides of it. And then as the years went on, I started to take a focus on a bit of foreign military sales. And when Ukraine popped off, I had a lot of guys that were fighting both from GWAT to with the Kurds to then Ukraine, and that kind of opened the door into a new sector for me that I hadn't really spent a lot of time on. And so over the last 3 years, I started to report as an independent journalist, just kind of tracking what was going on over there with my friend that ran another company called Battles and Beers, Nick. He's a really good OSINT person as well. And we had gotten to know the individuals in Mariupol when they were encircled initially. And that's how it kind of started off for me, was reporting on that. And in late 2022, Nick and I decided to go over and really just meet people and show that we're not just people on Instagram reporting. And that kind of changed the direction for me personally once I got on ground, because I saw a lot of logistic issues. And early 22 was really wild and crazy. Anyone could come, fight, help, get involved. And as the years went on, it started to get more organized and structured, to where
it was definitely Wild West. 22
very much so.
Our CTO Parker and I went over there in the summer of 22, not long after it kicked off, and I remember the sense that it was the Wild West.
Yeah, there was a lot of guys that had come over to fight. It was very kind of disorganized, and you were just getting placed everywhere. And the commander of the unit that I was with, his name's Ryan, with Chosen Company, he was talking about when he first came in, it was, here's your AK, here's 280 rounds of ammo. You're going north. Where? Hostomel. What am I doing? Kill Russians. Okay. Like, and that was kind of the op tempo, for a year.
Yeah.
And then things changed, and it kind of evolved, got more organized. And over the last 3 years, I've really worked as an on-the-ground advisor for units. I still was doing foreign military sales, but the advising was kind of the more important thing. Seeing how TTPs were changing, tactics were changing, and then really involving the warfighter on the ground, especially guys that were coming from GWAT and coming into this conflict and seeing a massive change. And how do we teach those guys? And so maybe about 2.5 weeks ago, we were embedded doing strike missions on Russians.
Yeah, so obviously that's going to be the meat of our conversation here, and I can't wait to get to that. But you skipped over a big piece of your resume. We were just talking before we hit record about activities in Southern California. I don't know if that's relevant here, or if you want to dig into that at all. But there's a big chunk of your resume.
Had an interesting background. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting background. Yeah.
And then I also worked out in cannabis for about 1.5 years as Exhibit's CEO in California.
So to be clear, Exhibit, this is again my reference point. Pimp My Ride, right? This is Exhibit, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Dr. Dre, the Eminem, Exhibit. Yeah.
Yeah. How's it working for him or those guys? What years would this have been, by the way?
This would have been 21, 22, I believe.
Okay. Right.
Going into, so a little over a year. It was very wild and very fast. He had created a company called Napalm Cannabis. A lot of people don't know Exhibit's actually a really big supporter of the troops. He was one of the only rappers that went on the USO tour to support. His dad's is a Marine. So he's pretty big in that. And then when he created Napalm, it was based off of his last album. It was to give honor to his father in Vietnam. And then we were doing a trade-in program where if any of the product was bad, it would go to veterans and law enforcement, so that it would, guys that were out, so that they could use it without being destroyed. So it was a really interesting company. But he was very hot heavy, and I've never seen money spent like that. But it's cannabis and it's celebrities.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm sure, man. Go ahead, Dave. You've got something on your
Oh, I'm just imagining what it would be like if Chris combined these two passions. An Exhibit shows up to Ukraine and he's like, "We heard you like drones, so we put more in the 18-wheeler," and it's like, in my drone delivery system.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was honestly attacking that for a bit because it was going legal in Ukraine and other different locations, and so we were trying to take advantage of that by being the first ones in.
I mean, we're skipping ahead, but those 18-wheelers, those shipping containers with those drone compartments are very Pimp My Ride.
Oh yeah,
They're
dude,
doing it
it's
right.
like-
You can
yeah.
imagine whatever you want. Well,
Yeah, like
the
what's
guys at
behind
West
that?
Coast Customs have built you a great drone storage slot in the back of your
Here's
shipping
your
container.
house you're putting on your property. By the way,
Drones
we
for your
put a-
drones and your drones
No.
on your drones or whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I saw some of these diagrams where it's like 2x4s behind the quarter panel, behind the thing, and it just slides, and it's like, yeah, it's pretty. Yeah, it definitely looked like something you'd see on that show. Before we get ahead of leapfrog all the way ahead into that, I do want to maybe use as a point of segue here that there's this open source intelligence OSINT kind of movement on social media. It lives on places like X and Telegram and Instagram and elsewhere. Chris, you've been a part of that. And
Yeah.
I'll just note that when the news of this Ukrainian operation on this Russian set of airfield facilities, when it happened, I immediately went to, I heard that it happened, right? Like somebody mentioned it to me, it texted me, and I immediately went to, New York Times and the Journal and, just like the big news outlets because like, I like the OSINT feeds, I like the Telegram feeds, and it's very useful and interesting, but trust but verify. So I was looking for some like, journalistic rigor on this thing. And it took multiple days, I think, to catch up. And Simon corrects me often. He's like, no, there's a lot of news. I think, Simon, you even mentioned your mom's up on this news through, whatever channel. Right. So like people know about this and it's in the mainstream now. But it is interesting that there's this lag between the OSINT crowd and the kind of the mainstream journalistic crowd.
This isn't even just journalism, though. Like, I mean, I remember being in the Senate and getting, quarterly updates on the Ukraine situation in the Senate SCIF, and they would have all of the member offices there, and particularly the veterans that were working in the Senate offices would be just yelling at UCOM because the UCOM information that they would give us at the TS level was so far behind what we were able to find out from our buddies and from Twitter.
Yep.
And it's like I weirdly empathize with the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal because like they're just not built for the speed of action. They're not ready for it.
I don't think that. Well, yes, you might be right, but like I've been to Ukraine multiple times. I've been to Poland many more times than I have been to Ukraine. Like there are people there, right? And maybe they're not out at the front where Chris has spent a lot of time, but like they're there. They have information flow. Is it because
that's the issue?
Yeah. Yeah. Diagnose it for us, Chris.
I've been in Ukraine for doing this for 3 years. I know Trey Yingst fairly well over at Fox. And he was a big component of helping me direct Project Leaflet. A lot of the times it's also those agencies don't want to put someone at a zero line, or they also don't build trust with the units. And so the units don't want to give them information or don't want to give them a story. And I think that's something that we're seeing in Ukraine, where a lot of these big box agencies thought they kind of move around like GWAT, but Ukraine operates in their own spectrum. They'll kick you out right away and they'll ban you from the whole country. And so I think a lot of the times when we were working with a lot of those or saw a lot of those big box media guys, I mean, in 22, they had locations in Kyiv that had trench systems in concrete bunkers so they could look like they were getting missile attacked because they didn't want to go to Avdiivka or Bakhmut because it's fucking dangerous.
Right.
And I think for us, like myself, Nick, or Atlas News, or Northern Provisions, or some of these companies that have become huge OSINT channels today, we've kind of focused heavily on some of these events, and we just build personal relationships with units. And so, for example, when the SBU did this mission and Gore did this mission and whoever else did it, I just messaged my guys over at the SBU and was like, give me what you can give me. And I had a quote that day. And so it's like, that's so much faster than what Fox or BBC or anyone's going to do if they don't have the relationship and embedment with these guys.
I think your channel or your feed might have been one of the first ones that like I saw and looked at with respect to the Spider's Web operation. I think that's what you're talking about, Chris. Yeah.
Yeah. Because we had shared it immediately after we had gotten notification of the launch and impacts. We did a whole article on it, and then we shared it over to LinkedIn, X, our Telegram. And then the goal was to get more data, do a second write-up, which we did the next day, and then do a follow-up write-up on what we're doing, which is what is the capability of their bomber capability at this point. and how does that affect their long range capabilities?
Right.
And so you find the main target of interest, and then you start breaking it down as OSINT.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that a lot of why we've gained such a big following. It's not just, it's more focused, I guess.
Well, one of our drum beats that we hit here that probably everybody in this community resonates with is this idea that the West, the United States, sometimes will provide tech over to these battlefields. A lot of it doesn't work because it's totally mismatched with the operating environment for a variety of reasons. And the Ukrainians in particular, and this is true in a couple of other, high stakes but low intensity conflict zones, all the way up to the high intensity conflict zone that is Ukraine. The pace of innovation and the adoption of innovations at the lower echelons, and the freedom and dynamism of these individual units, like the ones you've been embedded with, the 25th Airborne, the 3rd Assault Brigade, and these other kind of high profile drone attack units. We just haven't been able to figure out how to accelerate our pace of innovation and adoption. But also it's a tricky thing because they're innovating so fast. Like, what is it that we're supposed to adopt now? So there's a bit of a disconnect. Like, yes, we should learn from this set of observations and experiences, enable it, if we possibly can. But at what point are we supposed to adopt this stuff? Like, if we're always going to be, catching up to the innovations of the week in Ukraine, that doesn't seem like a scalable enterprise for the U.S. military. Do you have any observations on that, Chris?
I think you're 100% on point. If you look at World War II is a good example of this, where the nukes ended the war, but our manufacturing capability is really what won that war. Supporting our own efforts, supporting the Soviet Union, supporting all these other organizations. And when I look at Ukraine, I kind of see the same thing. We are not in the position to do what Ukraine is doing. Over a very short amount of time, Ukraine has been able to go from a non-developing drone company or country to producing millions of drones internally, producing their own engines, producing their own frames. And this isn't just air, this is, ground, sea, and it's all talking to each other. It's all working with each other. And some of these air-based elements are as cheap as $250. Ready to kill. A unit can come into a factory, purchase these, and go fly. And there's just no way that we can do that. I mean, even our cheapest, I'd say, fixed wing platforms that the military is looking at buying today is around $14,000 for a rotor copter. And so then you go up from there. And I think a failure point that we've seen is also a Switchblade is a perfect example of a failure point of what we produce in the United States. We sent it to Ukraine. It absolutely failed. And
this is AeroVironment Switchblade 300 and 600. Those are their kind
300, 600.
Yep.
Yeah. We had a couple of those inside of the unit, and we don't use them. It's very rare that we'll ever pull them out. The problem is that we're producing $100,000 one-way delivery system.
Right.
And the catch up between your topic of how much do we copy or learn from this, I think is we should be learning and we should be seeing what they're doing, but we have to be also changing the way that we produce and test and manufacture and develop, because Ukraine's not going to wait for someone to tell them. And that's neither are any of these companies or countries that cannot compete with the United States or the West in a direct military conflict or person-on-person conflict, that they're going to lean into AI and drone. And I think, Ukraine is an example of this. Today, they build 1,500 one-way delivery exact copies of the Switchblade. It initially was built out of a potato gun. Now it's shot out of a mortar. But when you look at the manufacturing capability of, you sent us a Switchblade, we'll manufacture the same thing and produce it for $1,500 on our own. Well, why would I take anything from the United States at that point?
Well, totally agree. I mean, these are themes that we hit on all the time. Dave probably has direct observations as a part-time, commander in the field grade ranks in the Army Guard, and he's our link with the acquisitions ecosystem. He has plenty, I think, of perspectives on this. Can we maybe pivot from this, though, into a conversation around the truly kind of innovative thing that we saw over this past weekend, where it truly was a Pimp My Ride adjacent, warfighting Pimp My Ride event, where we saw the Ukrainians do a massive behind Russian border attack via semi tractor trailers and small drones. Chris, can you maybe break down, just maybe like they could break it down into like the key components, like what happened, what was that technology, what did that look like? You've done more analysis than anybody I know on this topic.
So that was a program that went over a year and a half in length. The goal was to build essentially Trojan horses that would then go into Ukraine or Russian's trucking organization that would take those Trojan horses across country lines, and then they would be placed in locations nearby enemy air bases. From our understanding, the drivers had no clue what they were transporting. The most of the equipment in the semi trucks looked like very pop-up houses or other devices that you could either see through or that were opened up and there was a lot of emptiness inside, or very visual, easy to check. In a lot of those countries, it's not like our customs, it's loose. So, it's easy to kind of sometimes move things through. And they had developed a sliding rooftop system where most of the drones and everything else were hiding. And so when those trucks were transported across the lines, they stayed at their locations sometimes for days or hours until they were told to launch. At that point, a signal went across. The Ukrainian Special Operations actually conducted this mission in the building directly next door to Russian Special Operation Intelligence. So they did that as a point of, hey, we can get at you.
Yeah.
And once the roof slid open, the drones flew out, and then they had a predetermined targeting identifier that was trained with an AI over the last year to specifically look for bomber units. There was a pilot that was initiated with every one of those drones, but if the pilot lost control, the AI would then take over, look in a general area, find what it was learned to look for, and then go and strike that.
Can I maybe ask a question? So thousands of drones is what I understood. I don't know. What was
I think that's a much larger number than what was expected.
So
I think the number's closer. Yeah, I think the number's closer to around 200.
200. So were there 200 pilots who kind of did the initial guidance, but then terminal guidance became automated?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I think you can automate some of those where they don't need to have a pilot that's actually initiated. Once once the drone is up, you can have an automated guidance system that works for it.
Sure.
And there's it's changing inside of Ukraine. Pixel lock was very popular for a long time. But there's new systems that are popping up, and these engineers are quite good.
Yeah.
And I think once they lost control, then the drone does what it does on its own. It looks for an object that it's been trained to look for.
Right. And sorry, keep going.
Yeah, no, the total cost of that, I think, costed Ukraine around $500,000 with a net kill of around $7 to $8 billion.
Yeah, and that the impact on the Russian side was, you might have the numbers. I know some of this is just estimates, but we're talking about like strategic nuclear deterrence bombers and a variety of aircraft and facilities at these air bases, or an air base. It was a single air base.
No, they struck 4 air bases.
4 air bases. Okay.
Bases. Yeah. 2 of them were quite large, where we did a report. The last and 2 air bases, they were able to eliminate 22 aircraft, 7 Tu-95s, 12 Tu-22 M3s. The big wins were the 2 A-50s. Those are about 400 million apiece. I don't know if Russia has any more of them. They killed an AN-12. I don't know if they have any more of those. And they killed an IL-78M. I'll have 2 bases. And so they're expecting to release more footage off the other 2 bases. That would be 22 aircraft hit on those 2 bases. And they're expecting to get over 40. 40 kills was the expectation. So I'm imagining the other ones would be from the other bases.
Yeah, maybe just for maybe a point of reference, if this had happened to the United States, what's the equivalent? Like let's say like, are our friends the
If something
Canadians
has happened.
decided they hated us and launched, a spider's web attack on some of our air bases and strategic assets, what would that look like? Are we talking like the entire B-2 fleet is gone, or like Malmstrom Air Force Base, the silos are completely offline? Like what's the equivalent on the American side?
I mean, if I wanted to recreate this, and if I was looking at it the way that a country would do it, China owns a very large amount of land, of farmland around almost every one of our military bases.
Right.
Most of their
Hold on. I love the farmland topic because people are like, well, China owns this incredible amount of farmland. China bought Smithfield.
Sure.
98% of what China owns is just Smithfield, a 200-year-old American. Like, the Chinese don't come in and like hang out on the Smithfield territory. They are a holding company owner of Smithfield.
Have you visited those properties, Simon?
Ask me if I've worked on some of this.
Have you worked on some of this?
They were a client at one point, a friend's client. It's a lot of that land. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of Chinese holdings specifically in San Diego that make me nervous.
Mm-hmm.
But like the idea of like Chinese farmland, they're starving. That is not a vector for them to get really military so much as it is like purely they need that food. I'm much more concerned about Chinese hotels that are in San Diego and have 20 floors of line of sight over the fence line.
Sure.
That's way more concerning. But like I feel the farmland becomes like a very like scare tactic thing for me that I hate to let it pass.
I think, but
Chris, where you're
launch points, because like take Camp Pendleton for example. There's nothing for me to stop driving down past Camp Pendleton and launching 10 fiber optics and hitting all your birds on the airfield right now.
You could do that from the highway. There's like
I would do
Chinese land, right?
Like launch it out.
Yeah,
like you could do that freely right now.
The missile silos, and not even just in Montana, but everywhere, are just on farms.
Oh yeah, they're just sitting there. I mean, you could find a lot of this stuff. I mean, we know where most of our heavy equipment's just sitting over wire fencing, and you can visually see it. Today in Ukraine, they're doing 40-kilometer fiber optic drones. I mean, there's no.
And I think like to this point though, when I think about this Ukraine Operation Spiderweb, and please, Chris, correct me if you think otherwise. To me, a year and a half or a year-long operation is the cumulative efforts of like innovations in battlefield tech, but the killer operation here is tradecraft. It's like infiltrating the Russian like shipping network is classic tradecraft. I don't see anything in this that is even particularly difficult for America to replicate should we have like an existential threat on our border that we actually care about, right? Like, there's nothing that stops JSOC or SMU guys from heading towards operations like this right now if they were allowed to, but they're not allowed to do stuff like that. Like that's the bigger problem that I see.
The first thing I thought of when I saw the OSINT feeds on this was, oh man, that's some flashy, really cool next gen drone stuff. But wait, this is actually much more like the Mossad, pager and radio attacks on Hezbollah last year, where the killer app or whatever, Simon, to your point, is that they created a shell company and then infiltrated the supply chain for Hezbollah radios, and like that is some serious sneaky shit.
When I hear people say like, "Oh, America's not ready to do stuff like this," I'm like, "Have you heard of Stuxnet?" Like, we're doing a lot. It's more a question of whether or not America has the stomach to reach out and touch people in such a big way. And the Ukrainians don't have a choice, right? Like they're beyond the pale of like, oh, do we or do we not? Like it's all bets are off. Either we live or we die, right?
That's not what they're saying, Simon. They're not saying that we're not capable of conducting an operation like this. Obviously we're capable of conducting an operation like this. Right. What they're saying is that we are lacking the recognition that this is the new ammunition, that it has to be producible at the speed and volume that we produce 50 caliber ammunition. But the recipe for 50 cal hasn't changed. So that production has to happen very closely to the front or to the unit. This has to be part of every unit and every formation. Like it is the new ammo. It is the way that warfare is going to be conducted, whether it's strategic or tactical.
One of my OSINT contacts texted me over the weekend again as we were kind of riffing on this, and his kind of summation comment to me was, we need to pause reconciliation and pause fiscal year 26 defense budget planning and like rewrite the whole thing. I don't know. That's probably hyperbolic and it's probably low resolution or whatever, but like you are tracking the American programs that are kind of attempting to draft off of this wave in recognition of the thing you're talking about. Can you maybe comment on like what is going on right now? Like, are we making any progress on this?
Yeah, so there are two things happening at once, right? Our current system and the way it's designed, there are some really good people in that current system that have recognized this problem and are trying to fix it, right? PBAS is a recognition of that. It is a major Army program that says we need to be able to print these things. We need to be able to produce these things on a massive scale, and they're prioritizing it, and they're writing requirements around it, and they're funding it, and so on and so forth. But that's the very much old school JSIDs, program offices involved. It's still slow. Simultaneously, there's a big push from the senior echelons. My prediction from a policy perspective is those senior echelons have been saying very loudly and very clearly, in order to get production capacity and the rapid iteration on these sort of capabilities to keep up with the pace they move, that we're looking at a wholesale change in policy that takes authority, funding, all the way down to the relevant echelon. I mean, the whispers among the senior acquisitions community sort of folks is, what would happen if we just told every 06 in the United States military that they have their own budget and they can build out their own production and acquisition system based off very unique.
So Chris, you're intimately familiar with this. Each one of these drone attack or assault brigades and units in Ukraine, I'm misusing all this jargon, I'm sorry. Each one of those kind of has its own funding sources, has its own manufacturing and supply chain, has its own mandate to innovate. Is that a model for the future for America? And just as a side note, two side notes, PBAS, Dave referenced that's purpose-built attritable system. This is an FPV kind of COTS if possible or commercially viable small drone, loitering munition or one-way attack platform. And the second side note is that Casey Musgraves is from East Texas. All right, Chris, back to you. Is that a model for the future for the West? To learn from the Ukrainian model of individual units are standing up their own supply chains and having their own innovations kind of local to their problem set or their unit?
Be honest, I think we probably should. When you look, just speaking on the 25th, for example, which is the 25th Airborne in Ukraine, they're one of the oldest units. They've got a mechanized artillery brigade. They've got our drones, full infantry. They're a huge unit, right? When you walk into their battalion, they have 6 manufacturing drone centers for them alone. It's not Raytheon, it's not Lockheed, it's their manufacturing centers that they've stood up.
That's socialism. We can't do that.
Well, each one of them is pumping out 4,000 FPVs a month, and that's just FPVs.
They're also doing it with crypto, with crypto, Simon, which is about as libertarian as it gets. But sorry, Chris, keep going.
Not if the state runs it.
Yeah. No, it's not state ran. A lot of these units run individual, and it's because
the units are the state. They're arms of the government, right? So if we were to replicate, it would be default. This is state run.
Yeah, but how are you going to compete otherwise? There's a reason.
I agree. I don't think you're wrong. I'm just pointing out this is where it's going to run into the rub of the American system. How do you convince Americans, hey, the Army should build its own manufacturing plants that are going to compete directly and take revenue from private American businesses, but we're not at war? It's easier to say when we're at war. I think it's much harder to be like, hey, this isn't working, so the 101st is going to have a couple manufacturing plants that it owns and runs for its purposes, and like the AVs and Raytheons of the world are going to be like, that's fine. I can hang with that.
Chris, is that what's happening? Are they building their own manufacturing facilities, or are they contracting with locals to do it? Yeah.
Well, it's both. So like when you go, for example, there'll be like the one facility that I walked to is every single person that was 25th, except for some college kids, friends of those guys that are they can't get in service. Those college kids are going to engineering schools, and then they come to centers and they develop and design. You have some Western people that are coming in to also learn and see what they're building, because Baba Yagas are over there, and that's a big, huge drone. And then there's platforms that they're building compared to defense industries that are coming in, like Brave One, that are building their own platforms. And so I think you're seeing the same. They're kind of meshing together, where you have the Brave Ones that are developing these huge aquatic drones that we can't build in these facilities, right? The Sea Babies and stuff that are knocking out these huge warships.
Yeah.
And But
I
on
drove
the
one of
small
those, by the way. I test drove one of those when I was over there.
Yeah,
It was actually a lot of fun.
they're a super impressive platform.
Very impressive.
And I think, as each sector comes down off the different line that they're involved in, units are communicating with each other as well, because it's just becoming this level of just, well, you're building this and we're building this. Can we make it better together? And will this affect both of our front lines? Because if we go back to the West and ask for it, well, it's going to take X amount of timeline, X amount of price. And I think what we're seeing is that we're just going to be outbuilt. Just frankly speaking of it, I mean,
I see two major challenges, and the first of which is just the way that American industry is set up, and that's a difficult problem to solve. And the second is incentives. They're building to the front line, which no one in America is building to the front line. That's not happening. We build things to deter. So what?
But it won't after this war ends. Ukraine developed their own drone engines now. They're going to be a global provider.
Oh, for sure.
What happens with this war?
There's just a lack of incentive here, and it's like it actually, when you start talking about these manufacturing facilities that are like quasi government, quasi others, I think of the Manhattan Project, right? The Army, like, this is so important that you're all going to come live on this secret base, and you're coming from all these different backgrounds, and you're the best in manufacturing and academia and everything else, and like, we're all in it together because either we win or this whole thing goes away. And lacking that incentive, I don't see how we reshape American industry to catch up to what's happening there, right? Like, it's super hard to reinvent.
Chris, you and I talked about this offline the other day, and it was, how do you inspire that kind of motivation when it's not existential for us? The Ukraine conflict still feels like it's way over there, to most Americans, maybe even like nearly every American, but those who are like, have like us, have a bit of a fetish for, national security and geopolitics. So short of having an existential crisis where, the Chinese are actively bombing Camp Pendleton or Naval Air Station Miramar, or, the naval facilities in and around San Diego, like how do you inspire that kind of, innovation uptake?
I think, personally, we've already had a bit of that. We had months ago a bunch of drones that were flown around New Jersey and other locations, and everyone was freaking out about it.
Yeah.
And they didn't do anything. They were just flying. And so I think what happens if one of those is an FPV and goes into an NFL stadium? That's going to change probably the whole entire nation.
Yeah.
Just like 9/11 did. We just haven't had it yet.
Right. But you think that's what it will take? You think that's what it will take to kick everybody into gear? And
yeah,
Dave,
very much so.
Yeah.
If being honest, I think Americans are very, we're just very in a bubble, and we're so separated away from a lot of changes and things that happen, and we don't need to involve ourselves in a lot of it.
I want to put a fine point on that, because Garrett, you said something about you and your OSINT contact. We need to pause reconciliation when you do all this. Reconciliation includes $150 billion for DoD. And it extracts $2.4 trillion from the government coffers over the next 10 years just by reducing revenues. Could you imagine a Ukraine right now, and you went to them and said, hey, we're going to reduce the amount of money that your government brings in by $2.4 trillion over the next 10 years? All of them universally would say, we have a war to fight. We need that money. Why would we reduce our coffers like that? So for someone to be like, oh, we should pause reconciliation, defense is the tiniest 0.001% of what happens in that reconciliation bill. No one in the government apparatus thinks that national security is a priority of reconciliation. It's none of it. It is less than an afterthought.
I actually think that's the point Chris is making. It's that it's not a high enough priority, and at some level, Americans can only, it appears that our system will only walk or chew gum. Like, it cannot do both, and so it cannot effectively prioritize. Right.
So lacking existential threat. I'm with Chris. I can tell someone gets hit.
Totally.
Okay.
I think we're in agreement there.
Okay, but all right, we lack an existential threat, but the country rallied around building ICBMs, and we weren't in a hot war. We were in a cold war when we built ICBMs.
Incorrect.
Did we not? We changed an entire industry. Talking about the industry adopting kind of
Sputnik freaked everybody out in the 50s, and that inspired kind of a general American kind of understanding that, oh my God, there's something big going on here. But it took the expert class to get convinced of that, who then educated and persuaded the rest of America. Because average, street American, they don't even see or know anything about Sputnik. They need to have that put into context and then have leadership that prioritizes. So Dave, are you coming down on the side of we can do this? We are doing it. It's happening.
I am coming down on the side of describe it the same way. This is the new, this is the new capability. This is the new weapon. This is the weapon of future conflict.
It's not it
is already an existential.
I could not disagree more across the spectrum here. Because one, the presidents, because don't get me wrong, the presidents built the ICBM. The entire nuclear triad was built as presidential level acquisitions. No service got to lean down, which is the huge problem with ICBMs today. The Air Force is trying to modernize a system that was acquired by the president. And not only was it acquired by the president, it was acquired by the president that helped win World War II. So it wasn't like, oh, I'm the civilian president. We need to build this because of my great expertise. It was, hey boys, I just got home from the front. I'm the boss now. We need to build all the nukes the world could end. And one-way drones are not a world-ending threat. It's just not even close.
And thankfully, after doing all that, he then warned us about the machine that
he didn't immediately recognize, like, oh no, we built something terrible.
Sorry, everybody. I'm going to retire now. Bye.
But with the hope or the expectation that those things stay in their silos and that mutually assured destruction is as the theory is correct, and those stay in their silos forever. Like, this is the new arms race. It is AI. It is smaller robotics. Like, somebody's going to keep making this smaller and deeper strike. And so and cheaper. This is somebody can create that. Like, somebody in the United States can create that existential threat, saying, "Hey, look, like, we are going to start from square one, just like the Ukrainians did, unless we make the appropriate investments."
Because the Americans couldn't even create that the first time, right? Like, the man who created the ICBM was a Nazi. Like, we literally took the defeated enemy and said, all right, we're going to do this is how bad now that we realize what you were building behind the lines, you work for us now. And like the space program, the ICBM, all those things are built on von Braun's work. Like, this is like all well documented. We can't use this. That set of circumstances is almost never going to happen again, right? Like, we would have to go to war with Russia and then take their drone engineers, who I don't even want. I'd rather have Ukraine's, if I'm being honest.
Yeah,
that's tricky.
Yeah. I don't. You're down. You're down in the minutia of, like, we had this scientist that we stole. Like, but these specific situations. Like, I'm just saying that it would not be hard for our elected representatives, for our senior officials, whatever, to say that we are facing, the U.S. is facing actual existential threats on the globe, and as part of deterrence and as part of preparation, it's really appropriate that we make some changes right now.
Yeah, I think some people are probably saying things like that. So I was in Ukraine, Rep Don Bacon last year, and rode around with him for a couple of days out in and around the front. And he and I exchanged, lots of commentary on, like, why is this relevant? What should we be doing? And like, I know that he, among others, and he's a congressional House Republican who in some ways is, like, not very aligned with, the head of his party. He talks about it in those terms. And Dave, I think to your point, it is about deterrence, because I really don't want our country to wait until the existential crisis that Chris said is probably necessary for us to actually kick into high gear before we do that. We
needed that just to go to World War II. Like, this is a well-discussed, like, hey, Roosevelt, like, knew it was coming. And like,
I agree. Jared, I agree with Simon that, like, there's nobody, and nor should we, like, boil the entire ocean and change the entire, like, industrial base and all of a sudden grant all of the authority down to the lowest echelon. Where I just want to make a move in the direction where we at least get to the point of familiarization, to where we have a way of doing business that could scale quickly, where our entire formation, our leadership, and our actual doers are familiar with the capabilities and limitations of both these capabilities and their supply chain and how they're manufactured, so that we can scale quickly if we need to. That acts as preparation and also acts as deterrence.
Okay, so let's say that Congress, gets its act together and the executive branch recognizes some of this stuff. We are not any of those entities. We are private industry. And so here's the question I'll pose, and maybe this goes to Chris, but, like, how does private industry, how does a small tech company that's on the rise, that's fairly well resourced. How do we effectively partner with Ukraine to expatriate the learnings of their environment, their operations, their tech stack, their supply chain? How would one company effectively partner with entities over there to ensure that we are learning, expatriating that stuff, that IP, whatever those concepts, that technology, maybe some of their supply chain, to do the private sector's best to prepare for that kind of an eventuality? Like, how do we effectively partner with Ukrainian entities?
I mean, you have to go there. Personally,
Yeah.
it's manufacturing there, building there, and working with their engineers. They're very open to that. They're very focused on rebuilding their country and manufacturing their defense. And I think globally, you're seeing a lot of companies go in there. Rheinmetall's gone in there. Turkey's gone in there. They're all standing up facilities. And it's not unusual that, I mean, if I wanted to today to go to the 25th and say, hey, man, I want to spend 2 months here with your engineers, teach me everything that you want, and I'm willing to work with you and build a better system, they'll say yes. And it's not, they're open to that, and I think that's something that we haven't been open to. And we're secretive when we build products and platforms. And these guys aren't doing that. They're very open. They're very interested in getting help and developing and testing and building the next scary thing.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. They probably can't be as secretive as like the average American tech company is, because
depends on what you're building.
Well, and you're trying to be,
Yeah.
you're trying to retain a competitive edge. Over there, they're trying to hustle to make the best warfighting capability. They don't care where it comes from. They just need it now. They need it yesterday. And
and it depends on the
set of motivations.
If you take like Raven, like GUR Raven, that's building the big Cessnas that are flying out, thousands of kilometers. Those guys are pretty secretive. But then when you get into like the guys that are building the Sea Babies on the ocean, they're a pretty secretive group. But when you get into bigger units like the 25th or the 3rd or any of those other organizations that are running their own facilities, they're open. They want to know, they want to learn, they want to test, they want to share. And it's refreshing when I go back there, because if it's a 2-month gap, it's like, holy crap, you guys have jumped so far ahead than I would have ever expected in that short a time frame.
Simon, Dave, are American military acquisitions folks open to the idea of Ukrainian components in supply chains for a next generation of capability?
They're not allowed.
They're not allowed because of the NDAA requirements around UAS supply chain.
But because of Berry Amendment requirements around acquisitions policies, like they're just not. So like what it sounds like needs to happen here, to go back to our really fun ICBM analogy, is Operation Paperclip in reverse, right? Like when the U.S. under existential threat realized that Germany had all this stuff, we just stole 1,600 Germans for a bunch of programs, not just ICBMs. Yeah. But the Ukrainians aren't going to do that necessarily, because they're fighting a war and they believe in the future of their country. So we kind of need to send people to Ukraine and get them embedded left seat, right seat to be learning in real time.
Yeah.
Here's where
and they
politics
can't leave
becomes
too. Remember
really
that.
Oh yeah, they can't leave. Yeah, that's right. They can't leave. That's interesting. Yeah, the Ukrainian government does not like letting them leave. They're scared they won't come back. The very small handful of students that like get to come over to America have these really interesting arrangements with U.S. universities about like they have to come back. Don't take our youth from us.
Or they're females, like predominantly a lot of females.
Yeah, a lot of females.
If you're under 25, you're not leaving. If you're under 65, you're not leaving.
But on the reverse side of it, the American government is just not going to let govvies go into Ukraine to do this kind of stuff, which I think is a huge mistake. I think like if there's one place where we could do a real low investment and like we gain a lot, would be to send 1,000 Americans to go left seat, right seat in these manufacturing facilities and in these units to learn and repatriate these skills and, give the Ukrainians something. But that would really tip the scales in this like geopolitical fight.
Don't we allow for FSRs to go over there with some of the American systems that are sold, like Patriot batteries and that sort of thing? We have American either military or contractors who go over there to like train, maintain, all that stuff, right?
Technically, they sit just outside the country. I'm sure there are folks that are not acknowledged in the country, but like legally speaking, all of them are over the border.
Technically, it's supposed to be you don't go past Poland.
Yeah, right.
Technically.
Krakow's a great town. I would want to stay there too.
It is. It's a nice place.
But Lviv is also really nice. Why not be in Lviv? Lviv is really nice.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where you're seeing a lot of these companies coming into is Lviv.
Right.
They're breaking ground. They're setting up facilities. It's cheap. Hourly work is cheap, and these people are hungry to work, and they're hungry to learn, and they're hungry to build.
Yeah. All right. Dave, do you want to offer something like a final word here on like what does the future look like as we try and spin up, private sector capability to augment your counterparts in the acquisitions community and get this thing in gear?
I'm sticking with my prediction that we are going to see a fundamental policy change at basically every echelon that democratizes authority and funding, and this start working differently in a meaningful way, especially around robotic and autonomous systems and AI. So I am going to focus on the echelon where I expect to be granted that authority, and help them like weapon air out capabilities and scalable systems and production capacities. But I'm also going to hedge my bet, recognizing that it's entirely possible that Uncle Sam keeps doing business exactly the way Uncle Sam's been doing business. And we're going to continue to engage in the very traditional JSIDS PDO process.
So I think you could get a mix, right? Just like anything else. One, I think that there is a real appetite within the DoD, because people in the DoD take this seriously. Even the most curmudgeon acquisitions professional acknowledges at some level that like the point here is to fight and win wars. So there will be a huge appetite there. But at the highest level of the U.S. government, we can't even pass a budget. So like the ability to really reshape policy at that level, I am extremely skeptical about, because we essentially have a non-functional Congress, right? We're headed into another CR, which means that we haven't passed a defense budget since fiscal year 24. And it's unlikely that we'll have one done until we're halfway through at best fiscal year 25. Like
so
we're a year and a half, maybe 2 years behind.
Simon, you're monitoring things at the admin, political appointment confirmation level. Michael Duffy recently confirmed as Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. Is that what it is? ANS?
Yeah. So he's the chief of all DoD acquisitions. He's
right. So this is like the person, at least on the executive branch side, who is involved with this set of potential policy shifts that Dave is hoping and praying for, which I think Chris would join us in, doing a rain dance for. Can tell us about the significance of Michael Duffy, that role, and what's possible from that position.
So traditionally, I would actually generally say that role is not the most important place in the world, right? Because the services have a huge amount of autonomy in how they handle their acquisitions and how they get after things. However, I do think the political appointees in this current administration seem to be like very aligned in spirit about this problem set. A lot of folks coming from industry, a lot of folks coming from tech, a lot of folks like hyper focused on this thing. Dan Driscoll, Secretary of the Army, also testified yesterday and echoed a lot of similar sentiments. So I wouldn't be surprised with the volume of executive orders and the volume of memos from SecDef that you've seen flowing down, that there is more alignment within senior DoD echelons to empower the services to move faster in this space. I think to Dave's point, that it's likely they tried to shuffle the deck chairs to the maximum extent that they can under their purview. The wall that they're going to hit is stuff like Berry Amendment, preventing them from buying foreign components, and NDAA compliance, which are like purely congressional actions that have to be untangled in Congress. There's no way around them. Everything below that echelon, from big DoD all the way down to Army, I do think you're going to see a lot of people falling into line saying, whatever gets us there fastest, let's go. Let's break some eggs here. I think that is the trend line for sure. Speed is the question. How quickly can they shuffle those deck chairs? That I'm not sure, but I think Duffy will have another positive impact. I think every one of these appointees that gets confirmed and gets into the seat is going to have a positive impact on the speed at which we reshape the DoD like acquisition, not just policies, but like culture, right? The way we think about things, because you need leaders that can give you that top cover if you're going to start doing things differently and absorbing more risk. And I think absorbing more risk is the name of it, right? Like that's really what we're talking about, is pushing those risk tolerances down to the lowest level and letting people get after it.
How do you feel about that, Dave?
1,000%. I was going to use the word risk 3 times before Simon did. Recalibrating our appetite.
Smartest guy in the pod.
Recalibrating our appetite for risk at every echelon is the only way that this is going to work.
Yeah, what's the thing that I think you say this often? It's like acquisition people, KOs never get in trouble or never get fired for buying,
buying IBM or Raytheon. Right? Nobody ever got fired for buying IBM or Raytheon.
So
somebody might get fired for buying the best in class capability that they need that's got a Ukrainian part in it. That's it.
Yeah, right. And so perhaps one of the policy shifts is you need to ensure that there is risk tolerance built into how we measure performance in jobs, right? Like, I don't know if that's true, but I grew up as a Marine officer where risk management was like the number one part of my job. I mean, it was like the thing, right? Yeah.
That's what they teach military officers to do. Right. Identify, assess, and mitigate risks. And they trust you to do it with live fire exercises and real live combat and when bullets are flying, but they don't trust you to do it for UAS components. Or like EW sensitive effects. They don't trust you to assess or mitigate any of those risks.
Again, you hit a certain point
because you're not trained to do it. So
you hit a certain point where there's a wall. It's legal. Like it's a full, like you cannot mitigate, you cannot remove that risk equation for foreign components. You've broken the law. You will get fired. There's no amount, like you're just going to hit a ceiling there as far as the Army's ability to reshuffle those risk desks. There's other stuff that can be done, but it is what it is.
Why can I not also understand that risk?
Because is that of the law? That's it.
Why is that a more significant risk than the decision that he makes about where he's sending 1,200 soldiers?
That's always how it's been. Laws are blind, man. That's justice. It's right.
If you understand how that supply chain could have been manipulated for nefarious reasons, then that is just another risk that you were identifying and mitigating, and saying, like, it's not problematic in this instance because I'm conducting familiarization and I'm doing it in a place where there is nothing sensitive happening.
I don't necessarily disagree with you, but like the structure of a society of laws is such that like if you break the law, this is what they're supposed to do to you. And I'll say this, without getting too political, there's probably a certain amount of risk tolerance for breaking the law in this current administration that is higher than normal. So maybe we see some positive movement in that space as well. It's a place I'd be fine with it.
Certainly testing the boundaries there. Yeah,
right.
I mean,
yeah. This is my favorite type of law breaking because I always said this, like the FBI doesn't come to the secretary of the VA's door if he doesn't do exactly what we said he should do in the law.
Yeah. So without doxing anybody, when you go around to conventional part-time soft units all across this country, you will see a commander say to his team that is making one-way attack UAS systems or similar capabilities, like, hey sir, what are my left and right limits? And he goes, make sure I don't end up in Leavenworth. That's it.
Yeah, that's it. And it's the acquisition people that run into the problem because your operational forces don't get fired really ever. It's your GS-14 and he breaks the law, he loses a job. Like it just goes away. It really does. It's that quick and it's out of the hands of everybody. So to Garrett's point though earlier, and this is a thing I think we want to circle back to, what can a small defense business do? The question is, can you thread this needle? Can you make things cheaper? Can you solve this problem for acquisition professionals where they're like, okay, my best option is this Ukrainian piece. Figure out how to solve that. And the primes do it. They do it all the time. They find a way to buy a foreign component and they hide it in the supply chain, or they sell it to a European person, they buy it from a European, so it's a Five Eyes component. Like people need to be thinking about that too. It cannot just be, I built the best thing in my garage, you should pay for the best thing, and that's how this should work. You should be thinking about what are the legal and compliance limits, and how do I make it square for the end user? Because that's the person who gets fired and or has like their job laying on the line, and that's what's preventing us from getting this to a warfighter. So how do I make a $300 component as opposed to a $1,500 component and get it into the warfighter's hands? Go solve for that.
So we've seen a move in the direction that Dave and we all, but Dave is opining that we need, which is a shift toward non-traditional contractors, smalls, non-primes. It's incremental. It's almost minimal. It's almost even hard to detect, but it's real. And that to me implies that there is a top-down kind of risk tolerance rejiggering happening in the department. We've seen that with the SecDev memos, orienting on software, OTs and consortiums and CSOs and different contracting mechanisms to get the non-traditional contracting base engaged. We also saw over the past many months, Doge and Doge adjacent activities aiming their eyes of Sauron at the traditional kind of IT consulting, class of systems integrators and larger prime contractors. And, there've been a couple of stories recently in the news about Accenture, Deloitte, Booz Allen Hamilton, and others basically getting hit with between 5 and 10% reductions to contract volumes and cancellations of certain programs that they've been running on behalf of the government. So is this combo of top-down mandate to use flexible non-traditional contracting options coupled with the Eye of Sauron and the laser beam of government scorching the bottom line for the Booz Allen Hamiltons and the the Accentures of the world, where they're now laying off thousands of employees? I think the article I read was that Booz Allen Hamilton has a plan for a 7% workforce reduction, which is something like 2,500 employees. A ref is underway, all that stuff. Is that a virtuous dynamic here? You have an increased, level of risk appetite for working with smalls and non-traditionals, and a corresponding massive kind of gut punch to the traditional legacy systems integration prime contracting layer. That sounds to me like a good recipe. Argue with me. Don't argue with me. Okay, silence.
If that was
I don't know
directed
if I have a point. I don't know if I have a way of arguing with that. I'd have to agree. You have to have a mix between big and small.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, Dave, we rub up against these people all the time. This is the group of contractors that an acquisition or an acquisitions professional or a KO is they're never going to get in trouble for opting to go with Deloitte or Accenture or Booz.
Yeah, if you're looking for me to argue with you, Garrett, you're not going to get it. You and I talk about this all the time. I strongly agree, and I obviously I've stated many times that my preference, I think the best outcome for the warfighter and for the United States is if vendors are building great technologies, and that if all of the functions that are consulting CETA-esque are U.S. government positions. You don't you run an organization, and I realize that it's not a public organization, it's a private organization. But when you need something, it is an in-house capability. It is not you have very few consultants, and those consultants are for niche purposes. And I usually see that's the best result on the groups. They only hire these massive consulting contracts because they don't have people in-house to do the work.
Right. So if that workforce is being reduced and those contracts are being voided, downsized, whatever, who's going to fill that gap?
There are options. There is not one answer to this question.
So here's my hope and desire, right? I hope it's a combination of what Dave is describing as the solution, which is Gov needs to do that in-house. Some of it. And the other part of it is innovative, energetic, young companies like ours can fill that void. Companies like ours that are on the rise, that are de-risking their themselves as platforms, can serve as that layer that traditional legacy prime contractors have filled. So I don't know if you see that as a reality, Dave, but it seems to me that government is not going to be nimble and fast enough to fill that gap themselves. And so if the traditional legacy layer of prime contractors is, not going to be doing that for a variety of reasons, doji reasons, I mean, wouldn't it just be natural that young upstarts, are filling that gap? That just makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
It does. Okay, that framed that way, that basically goes back to the last episode where I was advocating that is the solution. Right. That smalls need to step up here, but we also have to recognize that there is a recipe that would allow the government to select us. Right? There's a recipe of compliance.
Right.
And we have to meet the United States government where they're at. We cannot just scream, "Hey, we're a small and they're big and this isn't fair and you should award us." We have to look as easy as an option, and a low risk as an option as the alternative.
Yeah,
that's our responsibility in this. Yeah. That's 100% the solution, but we've got work. Our community has work to do there.
Chris, when do you think we can attract Exhibit to take one of these, roles? 180-day, temporary government worker roles and shake things up a little bit. Do you think that's a possibility?
You definitely shake things up.
Fellas, it's been an invigorating conversation. Chris, thanks for joining us. I think that was at relatively short notice. I gotta believe that you're going to be back on plenty as the continuing saga around Ukraine and Russia continues to develop, unfold, and evolve, and as we seek to expatriate the learnings from that environment and up level our game here in the West. So with that, let's wrap. Thanks for tuning in this week. Follow us in the social media channels of your choice. There's a lot of good content out there that references some of the topics that we covered today, to include video and descriptive stuff about the Spider's Web attack and operation in Russia and other things. Follow us, leave some commentary and feedback on the podcast. That helps other people find us and join the community. So thanks again, and see you guys next week.